Widow saves a pregnant Mustang from cruel ranchers. The ending leaves everyone stunned. The gavel comes down twice before anyone notices the mare is still breathing. She stands in the last pen at the far end of the auction yard, ribs stacked like fence rails under a coat gone dull with dust, belly swollen low and wrong, eyes rolled toward a sky she has not trusted in months. Above her, a hand-painted sign reads Disposal Lot, No Reserve. Somewhere behind the bidders' hats, a rancher laughs about glue factories like he is talking about weather. A woman in a canvas coat steps closer to the rail. She does not raise her hand yet. She is only watching the mare's flank, counting the shallow rise and fall of it. The way a person counts something they are afraid will stop. That woman is Laramie Voss, and before this cold Wyoming morning ends, she will own an animal that no one else wanted, carrying a secret buried under old iron, one that will drag the county's most powerful family to her barn door in the dead of winter. If you have ever fought for something the whole world told you to let go of, stay with this one. And before we go further, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe if stories like this one matter to you, and give this video a like before the storm hits, because what happens in Laramie's barn before sunrise is going to stay with you. The Bitterroot Rehabilitation Ranch sits 11 miles outside of Sable County, a scatter of gray outbuildings and sagging fence line pressed against foothills that have forgotten how to be green. Laramie Voss has run it alone for 6 years, since a truck driver's heart gave out on a two-lane highway and left her a house, a mortgage, and a silence she has never learned to fill. She is 52, weathered in the particular way that comes from working outdoors through every version of Wyoming weather, hands permanently marked with rope burn and old scars from wire she should have replaced years ago. She takes in horses other people have given up on, animals too old, too injured, too broken in spirit to be worth anyone's time. Veterans bring their service horses here when the horses can no longer serve. Foster families bring ponies that bit a child once and were never forgiven for it. She asks little in return beyond what people can afford, which is usually nothing, and the ranch survives the way certain things survive, barely, and out of stubbornness. There is a room in the house that she has not opened in 4 years. The door has a brass handle gone tarnished from disuse, and dust collects on the frame in a way that tells its own story without a single word needing to explain it. Inside, small things remain arranged exactly as they were left. A shelf of toy horses, a hand-drawn picture taped crooked to the wall, a bed still made. Her son Dawson was 11 when a fever nobody diagnosed in time closed around his heart like a fist. The specialist who might have caught it sooner practiced 200 miles away, and the appointment cost more than she had. And by the time she scraped the money together, it was already a eulogy she was paying for instead of a consultation. She has never told anyone the exact amount. She still knows it, though. Numbers like that do not fade. The ranch's finances are a slow-motion collapse. The bank sends letters now instead of calls, which she has learned means they have stopped expecting her to answer. Feed prices climbed through the fall. The roof over the east stable leaks in a shape she has memorized, a stain like a running horse. Her foreman quit in September for a paying job in Cheyenne, and she has not replaced him because there is nothing to pay him with. None of this explains why she drove 40 minutes to a disposal auction on a Tuesday morning with $300 in a coffee can and a horse trailer that needs new brake pads. It only explains why, when she saw the mare standing apart from the other lots, head low, belly swollen with a full nobody at that auction intended to let live, something in her chest refused to look away. The auctioneer barely finishes his pitch. Buyers here are looking for meat weight, not bloodlines. When Laramie lifts 2 fingers instead of 1, the room goes quiet in the particular way small rooms go quiet when someone has just done something everyone privately thinks is foolish. She wins the mare for $340, a horse the county considers worthless, purchased by a woman the bank considers nearly finished. Neither of those valuations accounts for what is coming. The trailer ride home takes 40 minutes and feels longer. Every pothole draws a shift of weight from the mare's back legs, a low sound from somewhere in her chest that isn't quite a groan and isn't quite silence. Laramie drives with one hand on the wheel and one eye on the rearview mirror the whole way, watching a reflection she cannot actually see clearly, listening instead. At the ranch, the mare will not walk down the ramp. She plants her feet, ears pinned, nostrils flared wide enough to show pink. It takes 20 minutes of standing perfectly still, letting the animal circle her fear at its own pace, before the mare finally steps down on trembling legs into a paddock she has never seen. Laramie does not reach for her. She crouches at the fence line instead, low and unthreatening, and waits the way she has learned to wait with every ruined animal that has ever come through that gate. It is nearly an hour before the mare's head drops enough to graze, and even then her eyes stay on the woman the entire time, uncertain whether this, too, is a trap dressed up as kindness. That night, examining her under lantern light for injuries, Laramie runs a hand along the mare's neck and feels it, a raised patch beneath the winter coat, skin thickened and hairless in the shape of old scarring. A brand, not fresh, years old, buried under a coat that has grown in and out over it a dozen times since, nearly invisible unless a person is looking with their fingers instead of their eyes. She parts the hair back with careful fingers, breath fogging in the cold barn air, and finds the mark clear enough to read once the dust is brushed away. 2 interlocking letters, a shape she has seen before, on gate posts, on cattle, on the side of trucks that pass her ranch without slowing. The Callaway brand, the largest ranching dynasty in 3 counties, run for 2 generations by a man everyone called Old Silas Callaway, dead now 9 years, his empire inherited whole by a son who has spent every year since trying to prove he deserves it. Laramie sits back on her heels in the cold, staring at the mark like it might change if she looks at it long enough. It does not change. A supposedly wild Mustang, rounded up off open range and marked for slaughter for the crime of grazing where she wasn't wanted, is carrying a Callaway brand no one was ever supposed to find. She does not know yet what that means. She only knows, with the particular certainty of a woman who has spent her life reading animals because people have stopped being readable to her, that something about this horse was meant to disappear quietly, and instead it walked straight into her barn. Outside, the wind picks up, dragging the first cold breath of a storm system that the radio has been warning about for 2 days. Inside the barn, the mare shifts her weight again, belly low, full restless, and somewhere in the county seat, a phone begins to ring in an office that Laramie Voss has never once been invited into. The call reaches Kalen Callaway at his desk a little after 9 the next morning, delivered by an assistant who has learned not to interrupt him without cause. The county extension office has flagged an unusual disposal lot purchase, a branded animal sold without proper paperwork, bought by a rehabilitation operation 2 ranges over. Routine, on paper. Kalen does not treat it as routine. He is 38, built from the same hard material as his father, but without the older man's ease in wearing it, a discomfort that shows in the way he holds his shoulders too square in rooms where he is meant to feel at home. Since Silas Callaway's death, Kalen has run the ranch like a man defusing something rather than inheriting it, expanding aggressively, buying out neighbors, tightening every loose thread that might unravel the empire his father built. He has never once asked himself what his father built it out of. He drives to Bitterroot that same afternoon in a truck that costs more than Laramie's entire operation, parking it at an angle that suggests he does not expect to stay long. He finds her in the paddock, forking hay, and does not bother with an introduction the county has already made unnecessary. He states, flatly, that she has bought stolen property, that the animal in question belongs to Callaway stock regardless of how it left his family's land, and that he is prepared to be generous about it. Laramie does not stop forking hay. She lets him finish talking to the back of her jacket before she turns around, and when she does, her face carries none of the intimidation he is used to seeing in rooms full of men twice her size. She tells him the mare was sold at a legal county auction with a bill of sale in her truck, and that generosity from a Callaway has never once, in her experience, come without a hook buried somewhere inside it. The offer he makes is not small. He proposes to clear every debt on the Bitterroot property, the bank note, the feed supplier liens, all of it, in exchange for the mare's immediate return, framing it as a kindness to a struggling neighbor rather than the transaction it clearly is. It would erase, in a single signature, 6 years of slow-motion drowning. She looks at the mare grazing at the far fence line, belly heavy, unaware that her fate is being negotiated 20 yards away in dollar figures. Then she looks back at Kalen and asks him, plainly, why a man who owns 40,000 acres needs one half-starved Mustang badly enough to pay off a stranger's mortgage for it. He does not have an answer ready. It is the first time in the conversation his composure slips, just barely, just long enough for Laramie to notice that his eyes go to the brand mark on the mare's neck before they go anywhere else. He leaves without the horse, and without agreeing to leave the matter alone. That night, the county buildings and loan servicer that hold Laramie's mortgage receive a call from the Callaway Ranch office, and by morning her file has moved from a quiet stack of overdue notices to a folder marked urgent. Somewhere between his truck and his desk, Kalen Callaway has decided that this will not be settled with kindness a second time. The bank's letter arrives by courier instead of mail, which Laramie understands immediately is meant to be read as a threat. It gives her 14 days to bring the loan current or vacate the property pending foreclosure proceedings, a timeline that, until yesterday, had been informal enough to survive on hope and late payments. Now it has hard edges. She sits at her kitchen table with the letter in front of her long after the coffee has gone cold, running her thumb along the fold of the paper the way she used to smooth the corner of Dawson's blanket when he couldn't sleep. The habit surfaces before she notices she's doing it, and she sets the letter down like it burned her. Word moves fast in a county this size, and it does not move kindly. At the feed store 2 days later, a rancher she has known for a decade offers his condolences about her financial troubles in a tone that makes clear he has already decided how this ends, and asks, almost gently, almost like a favor, whether she has considered that the girl deserves better than to be fought over by two people who can't afford the fight. He does not name Kalen Callaway, but he does not need to. In a county this small, taking on the Callaways is treated less like courage and more like an illness people would rather not catch. At home, examining the mare in daylight for the first time without the distraction of the auction or the storm warning, Laramie finds more of the story written on the animal's body. Old rope burns around the pasterns, healed unevenly. A notch in one ear that looks deliberate rather than accidental. Whatever life this mare lived before the disposal lot, it was not the open, wild existence the auction paperwork implied. Somebody owned her once, hid the ownership badly enough that a woman with careful hands could find it, and then let her go somewhere she was never meant to survive long enough to be found. The foal moves visibly under taut skin that evening, a ripple across the mare's side strong enough to see from 6 feet away, and for the first time since the trailer ride home, the mare does not flinch when Laramie rests a palm against her flank to feel it. It is a small thing. It does not pay the mortgage or answer the question of why a Callaway brand ended up on a horse marked for slaughter. But it is the first moment since the auction that feels less like rescue and more like trust beginning to take root, fragile as new grass after drought. That fragile progress lasts less than a day. The following morning, a county livestock inspector arrives unannounced with a clipboard and a look that suggests he would rather be anywhere else, informing Laramie that a formal complaint has been lodged questioning the legality of the auction sale and the ranch's licensing to house an unregistered Mustang pending investigation. He does not say who filed it. He does not have to. And behind him, parked at the end of her drive without getting out of his truck, Kalen Callaway watches the whole exchange through his windshield like a man confirming that a debt is being collected on schedule. The inspector's visit leaves behind more than paperwork. It leaves a deadline, 72 hours to produce full documentation proving lawful ownership and adequate facilities, or the mare will be seized pending resolution of the ownership dispute Kalen's office has now formally raised. Laramie spends that night on the phone with a legal aid line 2 counties over, learning in slow, exhausting detail just how thin the ice under her actually is. The bill of sale is legitimate. The auction was legal. None of that matters as much as she needs it to, because a disputed brand claim can freeze an animal in place for months while lawyers argue. And months are a luxury a heavily pregnant mare standing in a leaking barn during a Wyoming winter does not have. She calls a large animal veterinarian she has known for years, a woman named Odessa who has patched together more of Bitterroot's animals than Laramie can count, often for the cost of gas money alone. Odessa arrives the next afternoon, hands sure and voice low, and confirms what Laramie has already suspected from the mare's labored breathing and the odd angle of her belly. The foal is large, possibly malpositioned, and the mare's body, starved for months, stressed by transport, aged harder than her years, is not in strong condition to deliver without complications. Odessa does not sugarcoat the odds. She says plainly that if this goes wrong in the night, With no proper stall heat and no backup if bleeding starts, they could lose them both. Laramie asks what it would take to improve those odds. Odessa's answer is a short list that reads like money Laramie does not have: supplemental heat lamps, a foaling kit, someone experienced on hand for the birth, ideally a second person strong enough to assist if the foal needs to be repositioned by hand. Laramie writes none of it down. She has already begun rearranging the east stable in her head, the one with the leaking roof, planning which boards to patch first and which supplies she can beg or barter for before the storm system due in 2 days arrives. That evening, driving into town for supplies with money she genuinely cannot spare, she passes the Callaway Ranch entrance, an iron arch overhead, the same interlocking brand from the mare's neck rendered 10 feet tall in black metal. She slows without meaning to, staring at it the way a person stares at a wound, trying to understand its shape. Something about the size of that gate, next to the smallness of one hidden, half-starved mare, does not sit right in the part of her that has spent 30 years reading what animals and land are trying to say when people won't. She does not know yet about the diary sitting locked in a drawer in the Callaway Ranch office, unread in 9 years, containing a promise Silas Callaway made and never kept. She only knows that the storm the radio has been warning about is now less than 48 hours out, that the mare's flanks have begun to hollow in a way Odessa warned her to watch for, and that somewhere behind that iron arch, a man is deciding just how far he is willing to go to make an inconvenient horse disappear before anyone asks why it mattered so much in the first place. The storm arrives a full day early, rolling down off the mountains in a wall of white that swallows the ranch by early afternoon. Wind drives snow sideways hard enough to sting exposed skin, and by dusk the temperature has dropped past anything the east stable's cracked walls were built to hold back. Laramie works through the failing light, hanging blankets over gaps in the boards, running an extension cord to a heat lamp rigged with more hope than expertise, and does not stop moving because stopping means noticing how frightened she actually is. The mare goes into labor a little after 10 that night. It does not go easily. Odessa, who fought through the storm to get there and now cannot leave until it passes, kneels in the straw with her sleeves already soaked, calling instructions in a voice gone tight with concentration. The foal is turned wrong, exactly as feared, one leg folded back where it should be extended, and the mare's strength, already spent by months of hunger and stress, begins to falter in a way that turns Laramie's hands cold with something worse than the temperature outside. It is in the middle of this, with the wind screaming against the barn walls and Odessa's arm buried to the shoulder, trying to shift the foal into position, that headlights cut through the storm at the end of the drive. Kalen Callaway steps out of his truck into snow up to his shins, and for one suspended moment Laramie is certain he has come with the seizure order and the sheriff close behind him. Instead, he crosses the yard alone, coat already soaked through, and stops just inside the barn door with something in his hands that he holds like it weighs more than it should, a leather-bound diary, its pages soft with age, one corner scorched as though it had once nearly been thrown into a fire and pulled back at the last second. He found it that afternoon, going through a box of his father's things he had avoided for 9 years, looking for old grazing records to strengthen his ownership claim. What he found instead was his father's own handwriting describing a debt of conscience, a mare gifted in secret, decades ago, to a rancher's widow whose husband died working Callaway land in an accident the family never publicly acknowledged, a quiet act of guilt money disguised as charity, kept off every official book because acknowledging it meant admitting fault. The brand was never removed because Silas never intended anyone to look for it. He meant to tell someone, someday, and never did. Kalen does not explain all of this eloquently. He says only pieces of it, voice rough, eyes fixed on the struggling mare instead of on Laramie, admitting that he spent a week trying to erase evidence of a kindness his father was too much of a coward to claim out loud while he was alive. Then he sets the diary down on a hay bale, out of the way, and asks Odessa what she needs him to do. What follows is not forgiveness. It is work, Kalen's hands, and used to anything gentler than branding irons and fence posts. Learn in the space of 20 frantic minutes how to hold a laboring mare steady while Odessa repositions the foal's leg by feel alone. Laramie bracing the mare's head, murmuring low and constant, the three of them moving as one exhausted unit against a night that seems determined to take everything from all of them at once. The foal comes free just past midnight, slick and still for one heart-stopping moment before Odessa clears its airway and it draws a first ragged, furious breath, legs already trying to fold under it in the instinct to stand. The mare, spent past anything Laramie has seen an animal survive, lifts her head anyway, turning toward the sound of her foal's first cry with an effort that costs her visibly. And in that motion, exhausted, bleeding, victorious, something in the barn goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with the storm still screaming outside. Kaylin sits back against a stall post, hands shaking, staring at the foal like it is the first honest thing his family has produced in 2 generations. Dawn comes gray and slow, the storm thinning into a soft, exhausted snowfall that no longer sounds like an attack. Inside the east stable, the foal stands on legs still unsteady, nursing while the mare, bandaged, drained, alive, watches over it with an alertness that was not present a day earlier, before there was something worth staying alert for. Odessa leaves near sunrise with instructions for the next 72 hours and a warning that both animals remain fragile, that the danger has passed through the worst of it, but not past all of it. Kaylin stays longer than that. He does not leave to fetch the sheriff, and he does not leave to file new paperwork. He sits in the cold barn with the diary still on the hay bale beside him, reading it again in full daylight, as though rereading it might change what his father chose to hide. The formal dispute dissolves within the week, though not without cost. Kaylin withdraws the ownership claim and the pressure on the county inspector's office, but the damage to Laramie's finances does not undo itself simply because the threat behind it has stepped back. The bank's foreclosure clock keeps ticking on its own schedule, indifferent to barns or foals or diaries. What changes is that Kaylin, without asking Laramie's permission first, quietly settles the overdue note directly with the lender, not as a bribe for the mare, this time, but framed plainly as restitution for a debt his father left unpaid for 30 years, a distinction he insists on more than once, as though saying it enough might make it true for him as well as for her. Laramie does not thank him warmly. She accepts it the way a person accepts a wound finally being treated rather than a gift, necessary, overdue, and not without its own quiet grief attached. She has spent 6 years being told by this county that people like her do not get to keep what they fight for. Having it handed back through a Callaway, of all people, sits strangely even as it saves her home. The community's reaction is not uniformly warm either. Some ranchers who kept their distance during the dispute now offer help rebuilding the east stable roof with the easy friendliness of people who were never truly tested by the risk she took. She lets them help anyway. Bitterness has never once put a new roof over a horse's head. Word travels, as it always does in small counties, that old Silas Callaway's legacy included one honest secret buried under decades of land deals and iron gates, and that his son chose, when it mattered, to finish what his father started rather than bury it a second time. It does not undo 9 years of a diary locked in a drawer. It does not undo a widow who died never knowing her husband's death had ever been acknowledged at all. But it changes, slightly and permanently, the shape of what the Callaway name means in that county going forward. Spring comes late to the foothills, as it always does, but it comes. The foal, a colt, dark-coated with one white sock, restless and quick the way his mother must have been before hunger and rope burns wore her down, runs the length of the paddock most mornings just after sunrise, the mare watching from the fence line with an ease that was unthinkable the night she stepped off that trailer. Laramie has not opened Dawson's room. She does, however, sit on its floor sometimes in the evenings now, door open instead of closed, the way she has not allowed herself to in 4 years. She has not explained this change to anyone, and no one has asked. Some griefs do not resolve. They only shift enough to let something else breathe alongside them. Kaylin visits twice that spring, both times briefly, both times standing at the paddock fence rather than coming inside. He does not attempt to reclaim the brand or the story attached to it. He tells Laramie once, watching the colt run circles it does not need to run, that his father used to say a man's true herd size was never the number written on his gate. He admits, without much comfort in the admission, that he understood the phrase for the first time only in that barn, at midnight, with his arm elbow deep in someone else's crisis he had spent a week trying to erase. The Bitterroot Rehabilitation Ranch does not become suddenly wealthy. The bank note stays cleared, but the feed bills keep coming. The fences keep needing mending, and Laramie keeps taking in animals other people have given up on, one at a time, the way she always has. What is different is smaller than money and harder to put a price on. A colt in the paddock that would have been destroyed within the week if a woman with $300 had looked away at an auction like everyone else did. And a man who learned, one stormlock night, that some debts are worth paying even after the person who owed them is 9 years in the ground. Somewhere in Sable County tonight, a mare that was never supposed to survive stands quietly beside the son she was never supposed to be allowed to have, in a barn that was never supposed to still be standing. None of it happened because the world made room for it. It happened because one woman decided, in a cold auction yard, that a life marked worthless was still worth the fight, and because, in the middle of a storm, a man finally chose to finish what his father never had the courage to say out loud. If this story reached you tonight, you know it was never really about a horse.